What if the voice outside knew your private nickname, copied your mother's lullaby pause, and waited for you to answer? What if footprints circled your house and never melted, a highway scanner echoed your breath, and a familiar smile blinked a half-beat late? Welcome to Whispering Abyss. Tonight's 5 Skinwalker tales feel real on purpose. We start at a door that only opens when you speak your own name. Listen for the clues. The wrong pause, 6 toes, a descending badge tone, a compass pointing at your chest, not north. Which moment gets under your skin first? Tell me in the comments, if you're brave enough to keep listening. Story 1. The voice that learned my name. As Skinwalker mimic, I was not afraid until the voice outside said my private nickname almost right. Starlight, it said, soft as frost, and then waited in the way my mother does when she expects an answer. But the pause fell on the wrong part of the word, as if it were practicing and searching for a shape it had never needed before. The porch bulb hummed. The trees held their breath. When I did not answer, the voice tried again, just a shade closer, as if my silence were permission rather than refusal. And I remember thinking, how would it know that name? The night had that clean smell of wet bark and cold iron that only comes after long snow. Uncle Ron's Keys wind chime bumped the siding with a tired metallic tick, a lazy metronome that made the cabin feel like it was breathing. The generator thumped a steady heartbeat from its box. My breath fogged and folded back into my scarf. A red scarf, mine, tied bright to the birch at the edge of the drive, so my friend Lena would find the turn-off around 3:15. The scarf barely moved in the still air, yet I kept thinking I saw it twitch against the dark, like a fingertip testing a curtain. I was house-sitting that weekend to prove I could live alone again without spinning out. The breakup had turned me weird and careful. The cabin sat 3 miles off the county road, up past a cattle fence and a switchback where the plows never reached. Uncle Ron warned me to keep the ash and salt lines intact, said it was a country thing, like keeping mice out. The nearest neighbor was gone for the holiday. The husky that usually lived here, Kuma, was at the kennel in town. If anything happened, I would be the one to handle it. Part of me wanted that test, until the voice knew my name. Before sunset, I walked the lines like a fussy little engineer. I traced ash and salt at the thresholds and the vents just as he taught me. A thin gray seam that felt like closing a zipper on a sleeping bag. My flaw is I overcorrect. If a rule seems like it might help, I will double it and measure twice. I checked the mudroom door twice, then again, then told myself to stop because Lena would get here and laugh at me. I tied the red scarf to the birch as a marker. In the dark, that red point was a promise that someone else was coming, or a decoy for whatever watched. Starlight, the voice said again, closer to my ear than made sense. And for a second, I let myself believe it was my mother out there playing a cruel prank from childhood. She used to sing me to sleep with a lullaby, and the third note always paused a tiny fraction too long when she was tired. The voice nailed the words, but stumbled on the pause, holding too long like it was guessing. That wrongness hooked me like a fish under the ribs. The porch bulb hummed a little louder. I stood by the kitchen window and did not breathe. If you have ever heard your name come from the dark, you know how your own bones can feel like doors. I cracked the window to listen, and my mitten brushed the ash line on the sill. A small puff of powder fell outward to the porch and a bit inward toward the floor vent, and my brain made a note of both directions while my heart thudded like a hammer in a shoebox. The glass gave me a sliver of outside air. The cold reached in with fingers of smoke. That wet bark smell climbed the wall and sat behind my teeth. In the porch light, I saw snow I had already swept smooth, and on that perfect blank, footprints that began at the first step and did not approach from anywhere, as if something had been delivered by thought and set down with care. Starlight, it tried again, then shifted, starl, and then starling with a too clean final consonant that none of my family ever uses. It adjusted itself like a technician tuning an instrument. I closed the window and locked it out of reflex, and at the same second the keys chime clicked once and then fell silent in mid-sway. The sudden quiet felt louder than the wind. I told myself it was nothing, just a string catching on itself, but every little hair on my arm stood up like the static before lightning. Something had taken the rhythm of the metal out of the night. What could do that without touching the chime? I'm not brave. I am methodical. I pulled out my phone and set the voice recorder to run, then opened the door an inch and slid the phone onto the porch. The light bit into snow and made a stage. I locked the door and watched the recording timer spin. In the second minute, the waveform rose and fell like whispering. The air in the cabin shifted, and I heard my own voice come back through the phone's speaker, whispering my full name like a secret I had not meant to give. I knew I had not spoken it aloud tonight. I had thought it, tasted it like a warning. How did my phone get my mouth to gift what the dark wanted? Wind should have shaken the keys chime into life again, but when a gust hit, the chime moved without sound. The rods tapped and no ring came. The string lifted with no creak. There was a shape in that silence, a shape like the absence of metal. At the edge of the drive, the red scarf fluttered once with no wind at all, a bright fish in black water, and settled at a slightly different angle. I picked the breaker box key from its hook, intending to reset a breaker that had not yet tripped, and the hook lifted light in my fingers. The iron ring was gone. A stupid detail, but big enough to file in the back of my mind like a splinter. My portable radio scanner murmured from a counter. I used it when storms hit to hear plow updates. The scanner repeated my last sentence with a half-second delay and a strange undernote, like a double voice. I froze. The cabin swallowed my heat in one gulp. The generator ticked, then ticked slower, like a clock with a loose gear. I pulled the main breaker down to listen better, and the cabin fell into a soft black that was somehow thinner than light. Outside, the porch bulb still hummed, bright on the snow, and my little phone glowed like a coal. The wet bark smell thickened, as if the woods had been peeled open and brought closer. No service. The bars on my phone were a cold lover's refusal. The road was drifted deep to the gate, and Lena had texted earlier that her boss begged her to close, which meant 3 hours of babysitting her own fear on the drive. I had chosen the dark. I had pulled the power. I told myself I could flip the breaker back at any time, a comfort and a lie. In the kitchen, on the linoleum, there was a faint trail where the ash line at the mudroom door had smeared. The mudroom had the only door that did not fit right after winter, and the seam there had been thin. I coughed as I knelt to fix it, throwing a gray plume toward the floor vent. On the counter, under Uncle Ron's loose recipes and a church flyer, I found the penciled page he had told me about. Iron disrupts it, he had written, and it cannot speak a name unless a human grants it. It sounded old-time and foolish, but the phone was still out there on the porch talking in my voice while the night studied how the syllables lived in air. When I pressed my ear to the door, I heard boots on snow, or I thought I did. The tread had a blocky pattern like Caleb's brand from the general store, a kid who pranked hikers for likes. I wanted badly to believe in Caleb. I wanted to be angry at someone with a face. I cracked the door again, just enough to see the first 2 steps. The prints were broad and clean, a brand I recognized, but at the 3rd step, they stopped pretending. The snow beyond the steps had 6-toed impressions like a child's drawing of a foot. They crossed the low fence in the yard without any sag, as if the prints had been set on top of the world rather than pressed into it. Something about that floating convinced me Caleb was a story I was telling myself to make the shape of the night smaller. The phone's light pulsed and dimmed as if something leaned over it to listen. The voice outside tried Lena's laugh, the exact little snort she does when she is tired and proud of being brave. It got the pitch right and put the stress in the wrong place, like an actor reading an inside joke without context. "Hey, Star," she says, and the voice made it, "Hey, Star," too formal, too careful. Then it found my mother's lullaby and almost smoothed the 3rd note perfectly. It had learned. It had listened. It was practicing my memory to sharpen it into a key. I stepped back from the door, and every board in the kitchen creaked as if my weight offended the house. A whisper came from behind me, not outside, not from the porch, but from the floor vent under the sink, a breath-soft shape of my name inside the metal throat. I did not want to turn. The keys chime did not move with sound. It moved without a whisper. The iron ring that once gave it voice was missing from the hook, and so the wind touched it and it stayed mute. I realized that the absence of the chime meant the presence was near. It was as if the metal held its breath for fear of being heard. I did not know how long I stood without blinking, tasting dust and the cold iron smell. I had two choices and both were bad. Barricade and hope Lena arrived on time, or reseal the ash and salt at the back door where the mudroom seam had thinned. Waiting meant giving the night more time to learn my house. Resealing meant moving through the dark, coughing ash and telling the walls where I was. If you were yelling at me now to wait, I respect you, but I chose to move. I grabbed a jar of iron nails Uncle kept for fence repairs and palmed them like dice. In my pocket, my fingers searched for the iron key ring. The hook had been empty. My pocket found only lint. I eased along the hallway, keeping my shadow off the window frames. The generator outside ticked toward a stall. The clock over the sink glowed on a dying battery, the second hand stuttering like it could not bear to step. I shook ash from the paper bag across the mudroom seam and coughed hard, a single traitorous burst that told anything listening exactly where I stood. From inside the wall, something shifted softly as a hand inside a coat, a dull slide that wanted to be more. My scalp crawled. The red scarf at the birch hung visible from the mudroom window, and for the first time I realized it faced in, not out. Had I tied it that way? The porch voice and the vent voice spoke at once, just shy of harmony. Outside, the lullaby came perfect, my mother's third note landing on the exact tired beat, a tiny flaw made flawless. Inside, the vent breathed my own breath back at me, copying the way I swallowed before I speak when I'm trying to be brave. The doorknob on the mudroom door twitched, not a rattle or a bang, just that shared human courtesy of waiting to be invited. The jar of nails sweated in my palm. I had the sudden, sharp sense of the recorder outside, still running, still capturing, still gifting, and I wanted to break it with my teeth. The rule on Uncle's paper said it could not speak a name unless a human granted it. I should have felt silly, but then I remembered the moment my own voice had come out of my phone. It had not learned my name on its own. I had fed it to the air by whispering to test the microphone, by saying my name into the recorder like a password. The ash line at the mudroom had a smear where my mitten had brushed it earlier. The keys chime was silent, because whatever this was had taken the iron ring that once kept time. The night had not needed the front door at all. It needed a seam and a mouth. I dug my hand into the jar, grabbed a fist of iron nails and a clumsy bouquet, and shoved the mouth of the jar beneath the floor vent. Heat should have lifted. Cold came out instead, a cellar cold that smelled like wet bark. The whisper inside inhaled like it was surprised, and I flung the nails into the vent. Metal clicked on metal, a cheap little flurry, and one of the nails struck something that gave with a soft, animal hiss like steam forced through teeth. The vent rattled. I felt something in the wall draw back, as if it had been stung. I lunged for the hallway and barreled toward the living room. My foot hit something small and round. The iron key ring, bent slightly, lay where the rug met the baseboard, as if it had fallen from somewhere above. I scooped it in one motion and threw it at the same vent, a reckless pitch that clanged ugly and true. The sound was wrong, like a bar hit inside a bell. The air recoiled again, less breath, more shape. The keys chime in the kitchen trembled. For a heartbeat, I heard one thin note, just a single metallic whisper of itself, and then it died. I got to the spare room, slammed the door, and pushed the trunk against it with shoulder and hip, lungs burning. The digital clock on the nightstand said 3:12. The generator coughed dry and stopped like a throat closing. Outside, tires hissed on snow far down the road, felt more than heard, like a thread tugging on my chest. The porch voice softened as if disappointed, the lullaby trailing its hand along the wall. The vent voice did not try again. The trunk under my palms vibrated once as the house settled. The red scarf at the birch had turned somehow, and now I could see only the knot, pulled hard like a hand had tugged it from the wrong side. The room tasted of iron, and the iron tasted alive. Lena's headlights carved the drive at 3:17. I heard her engine. The porch voice did not answer. The snow at the steps had a map of prints that began and ended in neat places, as if the world were a tray and someone had set the toy down. I opened the door to her like we were in a game where speed kept us safe. She came in with the night on her coat, and a joke dying on her mouth. When she saw my hands, gray with ash up to the wrists, her face sobered like a routine had failed. We sat by the dead heater with quilts around our legs and listened to the recorder. She needed proof, and I needed a witness. The recording had the same undernote I had heard over the scanner, a second frequency that made my teeth ache. At 2 minutes and 30 seconds, my voice whispered my name into my own phone with a tenderness that made me ill. It was me. There was no room for argument. I had granted what was outside permission to say what it needed to say. On the table, the iron key ring was bent into an oval like a finger had tried it on. One of the nails I had thrown was dark at the tip, as if it had been pulled from fire. At dawn, we looked at the red scarf. It was snagged on a bent staple in the fence wire, a staple bent outward instead of in, as if something had passed from inside the yard to out and caught it on the way. The six-toed impressions on the far side of the fence ended 3 paces beyond, as if someone had taken the world away and set it back smaller. The key's chime hung crooked. When I touched it with the iron ring reattached, it rang again, thin and weary, like a body exhaling after a held breath. Lena put her hand on my arm, but her eyes were somewhere I could not reach, measuring the distance between my story and belief. We drove back to the city that afternoon, 2 quiet people with thermoses and no music. The cabin disappeared behind the pines like it had never been there. In my apartment, the heat rose with a gentle clatter. I hung the key's chime on my wall past the kitchen, a foolish souvenir or a charm. That night, I dreamed of the porch bulb humming and woke to a still room and the taste of ash in my throat. The window was closed. The streets below were wet and ordinary. The apartment smelled, faintly, of something like wet bark, as if the woods had folded themselves small enough to ride in my coat. A week later, I was slicing an apple in my kitchen when the key's chime clicked 3 times in a room with no wind. Not rang. Not clicked, the sound of iron counting. I stood with the knife and waited, listening like a child in a yard waiting for a parent to call dinner. My phone buzzed with a voice note I had not recorded, the app pulsing as if I had pressed the screen. The note was 6 seconds long. The waveform rose like my name being inhaled, then settled, then shaped the 3rd note of the lullaby with a pause that made the hair on my neck rise. I played it again and again, hunting for an edit, for a splice, for any proof that I had done this to myself. The key ring on the chime had a new, old scratch that looked like a ring had been turned there once in another house. I had not given anyone the apartment key. I had not told anyone the new code to the front door. Still, some polite part of the world had tested the lock to see how it sounded. The final thought I will leave you with is this. When I checked the iron key ring on the hook before bed, it was there, warm to the touch, as if a hand had just given it back. I did not touch the voice note again, because I was afraid it would answer. Now we move toward the second story. Story 2, Tracks That Never Melted. A skinwalker's circle, I woke at 2:11 to a sound that was not a sound at all, more like a pressure holding its breath around the farmhouse. The wind had gone slack. Eaves hissed with a thaw that should have softened the night. But when I peered through the fog kitchen window, I saw a ring of footprints circling the house at a perfect distance, heel to toe, with no approach and no exit. The rest of the snow had started to sag into a wet glaze. The ring looked cut from glass and set there by hand. I pressed my palm to the pane and thought, if you have ever watched snow disobey, you know this feeling. The thermometer outside the door had been my late aunt's favorite little lie. A narrow glass tube stuck at 33, no matter how you tapped it, the red bubble hovering like a held breath. That night, it hovered stubborn as a superstition while icicles dripped with a faint steel hiss. The air smelled of wet wool and the faint sharp sweetness of antifreeze by the oil tank. The kerosene lamp on the counter sent up a thin breath that fogged the chimney, and the stove draft drew in these odd offbeats, like someone counting wrong on purpose. Frost feathers began to bloom on the inside of the window panes, delicate as lungs, even as the outside thaw whispered. I was here to earn back a different life. My name is Mara, 29, and I was caretaking my aunt's farmhouse through winter to save enough to buy back my food truck. I needed the paycheck and a clean reference to get a bank officer to stop tilting his head at my past due slips. The road up our ridge had turned to slush, and the county plow would not bother with us until noon. My cousin Danny promised to roll up at 5:30 with chains and coffee. The oil tank sat at 1/8 in the dim gauge, which meant be careful, and the chickens out back still needed their morning feed, which meant stay. I am good with rituals because they pretend to be rules. I tightened cabinet hinges, cleaned the flue, and treated folk fixes like hardware. Above the mudroom door hung a copper horseshoe my aunt nailed there for luck. She liked to touch it on her way out, 2 fingers pressed flat, as if asking a friend to hold the house a minute. Tonight when I reached up, the copper was warm, even though everything else bit my skin. Warm metal felt wrong when the lamp halo was cold. On the mudroom wall, in the chalk she used to write grocery lists, she had left a hop rhyme for the neighbor kids. Walk the ring once, walk the ring twice, speak your name, then pay the price. I tried to tell myself the prints were a prank. You could buy boot soles that stamp jokes. I had seen videos of people pressing fake bear tracks into sand. It should have comforted me that the steps were uniform. But the ring never drifted a hair out of round, and there was no mess, no scuff, as if a compass had drawn it. The chicken coop sat inside the circle, a little shape with a slant roof and a cheap lock. Usually, even at night, the hens murmur. Tonight they were a blank inside a blank, a silence that made my tongue feel too big. The oil tank ticked like a metronome, and the stove draft kept counting wrong, as if something outside wanted to match me. I cracked the back door a fraction and threw a fan of salt toward the nearest prints. The salt dusted the crust and crunched, but the track stayed bright as if glass repelled it. My measuring scoop jumped out of my hand and skittered just beyond the sill like a coin in a magic trick. I slid the stove poker under the door to fish it back. The iron came and rhymed with hoarfrost, as if it had touched a colder cold than the air. The scoop felt like a tooth from an ice jaw. I was still telling myself pranksters when a tune hummed from the chicken coop, Aunt's melody, the hop rhyme, and that soft chanting voice adults do when they kneel to children. I stepped onto the enclosed porch to get a straighter look through the screen. The porch windows were old and stubborn. Condensation beaded on the inside of the screen and turned into crystals while I watched, a lace of frost that mapped the prints outside like a mirror, 1 bead per step line, 1 bloom per heel. The ring seemed alive in the way a plan is alive. I reached for the little radio we used on storm nights. "Danny, you up?" I said, and the radio did a trick, repeating my last 3 words with a 1-2 beat, like it had a stutter that liked the sound of me. I turned the porch light on to see better and felt my own silhouette rise in the glass like a target. I told myself science could save me if belief could not. I looked again at the footprints and noticed a wrong detail you would not expect a prankster to get wrong. The toes alternated length, not like left and right, but like one foot changed its mind every other step. The third toe would be longer than the second, then the little toe like a finger flex. I looked at the thermometer. For a moment, the bubble wobbled and dipped a whisper below 33. The rail was wet from thaw, but the red fell, not rose. That bubble dropping felt like somebody's finger was running around the house at knee height, dragging the temperature down to keep the edge neat. Tell me that is not a mouth feeling like a coin behind your heart. I slid the stove poker through a gap in the clapboard to touch the nearest print directly. The iron hissed in a way I felt through my wrist. On the table, the lamp's glass halo bloomed a pale circle that reached the ceiling in a glassy breath. The stove draft, that wrong metronome, went perfectly still, no pull, no whisper like someone pressed their hand over the mouth of the house. I thought about the oil tank and the bank officer and decided to conserve. I cut the furnace so I could listen for the plow, saving what I could for morning. The cold came in slow at first, gentle as a suggestion. Somewhere above me, something began to pace. If you have an old farmhouse, you know the attic settles. This was different. The footsteps in the attic matched the spacing of the ring outside exactly, a heel then a toe, slow and patient. The roof had a torn seam from storm and snow, had sifted through in a pretty sift pattern I had meant to sweep. Footsteps should have smeared that powder. They did not. Each step reached through my ceiling as if the house's air were a floor. I stood by the mudroom door and watched frost feather across the ceiling in a faint circle, not a stain, a halo, perfectly above where I stood. I put my hand up and felt cold press back like a hand through a veil. I kept telling myself a trick must be at work. Heated boot molds could do a crisp edge. Uniform spacing could be practiced. The attic pacing could be a creature, a raccoon. But the porch screen wore a sugar lace that matched the prints too exactly, and the fence rail out back had 3 prints on top of it without any bending snow. There was a pivot on a porch post where no human could stand, a neat toe smear that ended without gravity. The mold theory held until it did not. The draft drew and paused, a breath learning my breath. I did not like that it learned. In the pantry, I found my aunt's notebook between canning lids and a jar of cloves. Her handwriting leaned like a person hurrying out the door. "It measures you by warmth," she wrote, "and iron breaks its pacing. Never say your name where its tracks hold." There were thumbprints beside the words in little arcs, like she had tapped them while thinking. I opened the nail drawer and found a single horseshoe nail she had left for show, more copper than iron, green in a pretty way. When I set it in my palm, it warmed until it felt like a little heartbeat. The ring outside pulled 1 inch closer to the clapboards. The thermometer bubble slipped again and held its breath lower. Something was stealing the house a degree at a time to keep its outlines sharp. I want to call Danny again. No service, the phone told me, cold as a shrug. The radio batteries blinked down to half like they were drinking along with the house. The oil gauge I had checked now showed a sliver I could cover with a fingernail, 1/16 if you were generous. The plow was delayed to noon, or that is what the radio had promised earlier, before it developed a taste for my sentences. The chickens would not cluck even when I tapped their roost through the wall. The porch bulb flickered, once like an eye that had been dry too long, and steadied. I'm not proud of this next choice. At 4:40 in the morning, you make bargains with yourself you would mock in daylight. I stared at the ring and told myself if I did not act, the pipes would crack and ruin my aunt's rooms, and the bank would hear I could not hold house. I told myself good caretakers do not just wait. The choice was to break the ring with a shovel and salt before dawn, or seal the windows and sit tight while the siphon took the heat down to whatever number it needed. I chose to move. If I am honest, the silence had put a weight on my teeth, and I wanted to hear a real noise, even if I had to make it. I suited up thick socks, boots, scarf, and tucked the hem of my coat into itself the way my aunt taught me. I took the iron crowbar we used for fence posts. I filled a bucket with coarse salt that looked like little clouds turned into stones. At the mudroom, the copper horseshoe above the door held its warmth like a little stove, a wrong comfort. I set my hand to it anyway and felt that strange living heat. Then I turned the lock and opened the door. My boot's sole skimmed the nearest print. It flash froze with a sound like candy dropped on marble. For one heartbeat, I was pinned like a pinned moth, and I had time to hear the attic step that matched my breath. I yanked back with both hands, and my foot came free, carving a dark gouge across the closest print. The mark broke the neat edge into a ragged crescent. I had broken the ring without meaning to, and I was standing with one foot in air and one on wood, and the copper over my head felt like a sun that had forgotten it was night. The hop rhyme spoke from the chicken coop in my aunt's voice. The melody I knew, but the breaths between the beats belonged to me. Walk the ring once, walk the ring twice. It said, speak your name, then pay the price, and there was a catch after the word speak that was my exact throat. The circle moved like a creature that had been waiting for a reason. The prints adjusted, 3 at a time, a flowing belt tightening to close the distance to the porch. The gouge I had made softened, but only inside the break, like the snow there had been told to be ordinary. The halo on the ceiling lowered, the pale ring dimming the lamp until the wick hissed. For a moment, the stove draft reversed, inhaling rather than drawing, a mouth tasting inside air. I felt the house consider me like a dot on graph paper. I understood, cold and slow, that the ring had never been a wall. It was a tether for taking what it needed until someone helped it across. By cutting the furnace, I had obliged it. Warm and cold met with no argument. By breaking the print, I had given it a bridge, a defect that matched a defect. I pictured heat like fog flowing through that flaw, and I felt sick that my tidy rationing had made its math work. The porch screen laced itself with new crystals. The thermometer bubble slipped and held a breath lower, a graceful little bow as if it were pleased to keep the circle sharp. The hop rhyme tried my name on its tongue without saying it. My aunt's melody forming the space where it would go. If you have ever heard someone almost say your name, you know how the back of your neck tries to grow eyes. My aunt's note had been clear. Iron breaks its pacing. Copper fools you warm. I knelt hard and scattered a fistful of rusty horseshoe nails in the gouged print. The cold there hissed like wet fat in a pan. I pressed the iron crowbar across the break like a bridge of my own, a bar to cross the crossing. The air above the crowbar went briefly black in the way clear ice looks black over deep water. The ring frayed at that point, edges unzipping like stitches pulled too fast. The porch light brightened to shade. The attic footsteps stumbled one beat off and fell silent. The hop rhyme tried again, softer, Aunt's voice with a little child's echo under it, and then the breaths changed. The breaths turned into a stranger's timing that did not belong to a person, a rhythm that was all math and no sleep. The lamp's halo shrank back to the chimney and left a pale ring on the ceiling the size of a winter hat. The stove draft pulled the right way again, lazy and steady as if a long sigh had finished. The gouged print clotted and refroze, not perfect, but good enough that the ring's elegant circle could not close over it like a healed wound. I stood, legs shaking, and threw salt that looked like confetti at a parade I did not attend. I do not know how long I stood there listening for a footstep that did not come. The server of the radio blinked back to 1 bar of battery and held. The thermometer's bubble ticked upward toward its favorite lie, 33. The copper over my head cooled to the same lifeless chill as the nails in my pocket. The oil tank tick resumed its steady tap, a heartbeat you can live with. I closed the mudroom door and put the crowbar back against it, as if iron could become a thought that the house would remember. The chickens muttered in their sleep the way drunk people do in taxis, and the relief made me laugh until it sounded too loud. Danny's headlights pushed through the trees at 5:46, later than promised and beautiful for it. The porch boards had taken the salt into themselves in one clean arc that looked burned in. She found me pale with frost rimming my cuffs where I had been pinned, and I told her a version of the truth with the parts that would not make her look at me like a mirror of her own fear. We checked the pipes, and they held. The bank meeting at 9 became a missed call and a voicemail. I had chosen my house over my pitch and lost a week of goodwill. Sometimes the worst price is not dramatic. It is small and scheduled. At noon the sun did its job, and everything slumped. Drift sighed like old dogs. Ruts softened in his soup. Only the faintest circle of shadow clung to the line where the farmhouse kissed the earth. It looked like a skirt hem that had been wet and had dried darker. Inside, above the table, a pale ring remained on the ceiling around the lamp, like the afterimage you see when you stare at a bulb. I rubbed it with a towel, and it did not smudge. You may say condensation. You may be right. I find I need to name it. The mat felt warm, not hot, not heated by a vent, warm like a palm laid on a fevered forehead. I held still a long time, counting. The warmth faded, returned, like footsteps pacing in a circle too slow to hear as a beat. Around my ceiling light, there was nothing to see. The walls had that gentle city night creak. The wind outside was honest. I could hear my upstairs neighbor's laugh through the floor, the one that always makes me smile. I told myself warmth rises, mats hold heat, and I went to bed telling myself another simple, true thing. Warmth is not a name, and I had not spoken mine anywhere near that doormat. I am sure I did not, even if the rhythm of the night matched my breath a little too well. I keep the copper horseshoe in my bag now, not over any door. It is a souvenir of a mistake, and it feels wrong to leave it high where it can pretend to help. The crowbar stays in the farmhouse, leaning by the mudroom, a thin line I want to believe in. Danny tells me I should build a better life with less winter in it. I tell her I will. When I visit the farm to check the pipes, I tap the crowbar with my knuckles and count to 2 before I go inside. The ceiling ring has faded like a bruise. The thermometer has cracked. The hop rhyme on the mudroom wall is smudged in the exact place my name would fit, a small swipe the size of a fingertip. If you have ever felt the world pace once around you and then wait, you will understand why some nights I set my phone on the floor by the door and do not turn on any lights. I do not record. I do not ask. I listen long enough to be ashamed of listening. The neighbors come home, and the pipe in the wall knocks twice like a friend with cold hands. That is all. Then I fall asleep with my socks on like a child. Sometimes I wake and the doormat is warm, and sometimes it is not. And that should be an answer, but it is not. Not really. Now we move to the third story, a night shift that learned my voice through a scanner and waited by mile marker 19. If you want it, say the word. Story 3, night shift at mile marker 19. The SkinWalker in the median, the first thing that went wrong was not a scream or a shape. It was a timing error. My highway scanner repeated my last breath half a second late, a soft copy of my throat clearing, as if the night wanted to practice being me. Hazard strobes clicked like a metronome against the sleet. The stranded sedan at mile marker 19 idled with its hazards off and its windows fogged by a driver who was not there. Something in the median whispered my unit almost right, like it had read it on a clipboard and guessed at how to say it in a hurry. Sodium lamps hummed a tired yellow halo over salt, slick asphalt. The lot of it smelled like burnt flare powder and hot brakes and winter laundry. Sleet pecked at my high-vis jacket with steady little stings. Wipers thudded twice on the glass, and then a ghost delay thudded again in my head. The wind fussed in the median grass, the kind of stray breeze you get from trucks that are not visible yet. The battery fan under my dash whined. The scanner burped radio squelch, then inhaled in my exact rhythm like a quiet mockery. If you have worked a shoulder alone, you know how a hum can become a thought. I was covering overtime on the safety service patrol because Bills eat courage for breakfast. My sister May and I were a month from losing our shared apartment if I missed the bonus. Troopers were tied up at a multi-car crash near mile 21. Dispatch begged for eyes at 19, and they noted a possible pedestrian in the median. My flaw is I cannot let a scene sit unresolved. I always want to finish the picture, even if the frame is missing. The weather wrote black ice in cursive across the road, but I told myself I had cones, flares, and rules strong enough to read. Up close, the sedan looked like a person forgotten mid-sentence. Doors unlocked, engine warm, radio off, hazards not engaged. A wallet sat in the cup holder. A phone lay face up with a draft text that read, "It is saying my unit," the cursor blinking like a heart monitor. Footprints did not lead to the car. They started mid-lane, 5 strides from the shoulder, like someone had stepped down from a low ladder and no one else could see, then ran to the median and stopped beside a culvert grate. I put a hand on my mic and did not key it. The scanner said, "Unit 7, I am at 19," in my voice anyway. I swept my light past the mile marker post. Number 19 glowed green like old toothpaste, and near the bottom, a nickel-sized notch darkened the metal where a bolt should have been. My triangle kit had a cracked panel that rang dull when I tapped it like a bell that had come down sick. When I cleared my throat, the scanner's sideband echo clicked awake, hungry for the habit. The dash thermal cam threw up a ghost smear in the median where no person stood. Flares burn 15 minutes if you set them right. I set 3 on the shoulder and did the math against the clock in my head. I coned off the lane line, lit the flares, and watched the orange hiss lick sleet off the ground. Habit made me key up to speak my full name for overtime staffing logs. Saying your name is normal at the start of shift. It felt normal until I heard it repeat, pitched exactly like me from the emergency call box across the median. The call box had not worked since before I got hired. I knew that because I wrote the maintenance note myself, and still it crackled alive in my cadence and asked for help. The scanner coughed and copied the request with a polite dispatch tone. I went to the sedan first because people leave clues in the banal. The heater was on low, not high, like the driver had not been panicking. The red hazard switch was not pressed. In the cup holder, the wallet was unzipped as if a license had been shown and then not quite put away. The phone's draft text blinked on the lock screen. The driver had started to type and then stopped at sound. I shut the enemy of night, the part of your brain that volunteers explanations, and listened to the sleet sear the flares. Somewhere in the median a voice said, 7, and waited like it wanted to be corrected. For quiet, I kill my engine, which kill my heater and the steady pulse that keeps the strobes honest. It also meant the battery started its slow chew down. The cold stepped into the cab and found the shiny parts of my teeth. I grabbed the triangle kit, the cracked panel thudding soft against my leg, and crossed to the median edge with the kind of careful you keep for ice. As I slid the door shut, the dash thermal cam flashed a frame that made my breath hitch. A person's shape stood beside me on screen, empty black where heat should be, like a hole in winter wearing a coat. The silhouette near the culvert had the outline of a trooper, that hat with the flat brim, and the stance of someone who can write you a ticket without looking up. No red and blues wash the grass. Boots do not lie on nights like this, and the tread I saw in the slush by the grate did not belong to any brand I knew. He called to me using my unit. Then he called me Lex, the name only May keeps for me, a sound so domestic it felt wrong under sodium. Everything in me wanted to be the person who assists. I stepped past the last flare and onto the first pad of median grass. Dispatch was busy writing in 5 voices on the same channel from the pileup. Hold traffic unless life-threatening, came the call. Battery dipped on my instrument panel to a number that feels like a dare. Cell bars flickered like they were out in the wind too. Sleet thickened to a sheet that turned the median into a shallow river. A semi wailed by too close, dragging sleet into the air like shrapnel and painting me in cold grit. The wash of salt slush reached the flare nearest me and snuffed it. One orange hiss dying into a smoking line, and then a thin string of dark. The scanner changed when a flare died. The echo got clearer, like class starting when a bell rings. I coughed, and it coughed after me. May's cadence, the little chuff she makes when she is telling me to stop, came back from a median in a voice that almost fit her throat. Alex, come closer, it tried, and made the second syllable a little too long. You can forgive a bad impression if you want to. You can forgive anything if you want to hear what it is going to say next. I took 2 more steps, and the cold in the grass rose past my boots and into my bones like a tide. Field manual memory is a stupid comfort until it is all you have. Repeaters can parrot transmissions, but they cannot copy breaths. They do not learn throat clicks. The call box across from me had a tag zip tied to it that read out of service, and still I heard my own airway flex in its little speaker, played back as if I were an instrument. The thermal cam screen I had left on in the truck, visible through the open door, showed the cold shape shying off whenever the mile marker shadow fell a certain way under the strobe. It would not step into that dark seam when the rhythm hit right. I tried to make the prank theory fit because it kept me human. A bored trooper with a scanner app could ride my words and spook a rookie. A trickster could add tracks and vanish when a semi thundered by. I shined my light into the sleet where the silhouette stood. The hat brim faced wrong when it turned front and back, swapping in a way that made geometry feel drunk. Near the grate, one print showed 6 toes when slush softened and a brief clear melted through. The tracks began right at the grate lip with no approach. The prank theory dropped like a wrench you thought you had in hand. Back in the cab, I could have shut the door and reported no contact. That would have been defensible. It would also have been a lie that kept me warm while someone or something said my name in my sister's voice. I chose the choice that trapped me. I took the triangle kit back out into sleet and set one panel in the grass to my left. I intended to triangulate a safe corridor, throw a reflected box that could keep a car off me and a person in. The scanner spoke my full name from the culvert, then my home street, the same words I had offered earlier for overtime logs. The night split the way old tape splits near the end. The culvert whispered May, the way she says it into a hoodie when she is half asleep. The scanner answered in dispatch tone, Unit 7 go ahead, without any trooper actually present. The trooper silhouette stood in the one spot where the thermal said there was absence, not presence. Flares burned down to nubs that smoked and spat. The last one guttered like a person trying not to laugh. I looked at the milepost notch, and by accident or grace the shadow of that notch lined up with the strobe interval, painting a thin black seam across the grass toward me. The cracked triangle had a weird advantage. When I tapped it, it rang dull, as if it contained a pocket of air that wanted to hide. I planted it at a precise angle against the iron post, edge to edge, so the notched shadow in the crack panel created a little box of dead air. If you have ever made a fort out of shadows as a kid, you know the giddy and the shame of believing what you just built. I keyed my mic and drove. The culvert voice lunged toward me on a breath like my own. For a second the wind died, and I could hear the strobe relay click inside the truck like a heartbeat. The thin seam of shadow across the grass looked ridiculous until the cold shape would not cross it. I backed along that seam step by step, triangle edge leading like a shield. The silhouette of the wrong trooper kept pace, just out of alignment, a half second behind me, like it was reading my file and turning pages with wet thumbs. The last flare died, and the hiss left the night, taking the only warmth that had not been mine. I tripped over a cone and went to one knee hard enough to taste pennies. A cold hand did not touch me. It touched the air where my coat had been a second ago. The scanner repeated my unit with perfect familiar contempt, then added May's giggle for the first time. I did not let it finish. I shoved the triangle panel against the post, held the mic keyed, and let the feedback take the shape out of the air like chalk washed off a board. I shoved myself backward into the cab and let the door speak the language of metal, a good blunt thud. I twisted the key. The starter whined thin. Battery agreed to try and then shrugged me off. Hazard strobes limped in a crooked rhythm that made my teeth want to grind. I watched the sedan's tatch needle tick down without a hand on it and land on dead. The triangle slid off the post and lay there like trash. On the scanner, I kept my voice even and said, "No contact at 19, stranded vehicle secured, clearing shoulder." I did not say my name. I did not say anything a mouth could use as a ladder. I just let the weather talk and filed the idea like a nail under a rug. The reprimand for equipment misuse came 2 days later. The feedback had blown my post out of true and cooked a fuse. Write-ups are paper that want to become stories people tell about you. My supervisor said, "Next time, stay in the cab." May said, "Why does your overtime come with ghosts?" and wrapped her palms around her tea like she was guarding a candle. The apartment bill sat on the counter like a dare we had not met yet. I kept the cracked triangle on my toolbox shelf because throwing it away felt like letting something finish a sentence I had interrupted. A week later at 3:19 a.m., chirp from my phone woke me in that exact weird hour when city silence feels rural. 10:19, the app said, "Return to station," in a voice that could have been any dispatcher and still sounded like the road. The phone had been off, screen black, battery full because I had charged it before bed. The app log showed a new recording saved at 2:49, 30 seconds long, labeled automatically by time and GPS. It was me breathing, just breathing a slow, low in and out, with one small throat clear around second 12 that has lived in my body since childhood. I listened 5 times, and then I turned the phone face down and sat on my hands like that could keep me from being a source again. I will agree, and I will not turn the phone over. I kept seeing the notch on a mile post whenever I closed my eyes. In my living room, between the slats of the blinds, the streetlight cast a small broken shadow on my carpet that looked like a notch too. I worked the next night and avoided 19 by swapping calls with another unit. It is silly to call that superstition. It is more like respect, the way you do not say the name of a storm when the barometer drops. I cleared 3 tires, gave 6 gallons of gas, broke up one shoulder argument, and kept my engine on no matter how badly I wanted to hear the night breathe. They put a hand on my shoulder while I sat at the table and said, "You look like the highway is still moving under you." In the window, our reflection sat with us like a third person we had not invited. I did not tell her that our apartment hallway webcam had glitched at noon and printed a cold silhouette between the coat hooks, because the world does not need more static when it already has plenty. I told her about the write-up. She told me about the tea shop job she thought she could pick up on Saturdays. We exchanged normal like it was salt on ice, a work you repeat because it keeps you upright. At 2 in the morning, I woke anyway because that is when roads learn your name. I stood at the kitchen sink and watched the quiet stairwell through the peephole. The building heater side. Somewhere a neighbor coughed in a way that had no double. I touched my own throat and did not clear it. I put the triangle under the sink behind the dish soap. because a box that once made dead air should not sit where light can find it. If you have ever pressed your fingers to a metal post in sleet and felt it hum back at you like a throat, you know why I did not sleep again until morning. The next shift, I logged on with my unit number and left my name off. Dispatch said, "Copy," without asking twice, which is a small mercy. I kept to shoulders that were bright and loud and full of human mistakes. I told myself it had needed my voice in the air and my warmth on the ground and my stubbornness in the middle, and that is a lot of me for any night to carry. The culvert at 19 probably drank sleep, and I'm minding no one now. The sedan got towed, and the driver called a rideshare from a diner where the coffee tastes like pennies and hope. Sometimes when I park the truck at the end of shift, the strobe keeps blinking in my head, a rhythm that learned my pulse and did not forget. Sometimes the scanner burps, and I check my hands to make sure they are not already on the mic. I have started leaving the radio on low in the apartment while I sleep, not because I want to hear anything, but because steady static is better than new silence. May has not said anything about the noise. Maybe she does not hear it. Maybe she does, and lets me keep my little wall of sound because she loves me and wants to see me make rent. If you take anything from this, let it be this small, plain rule. Finish the picture only when the frame is yours. If the scene starts to speak with your timing, it already has too much of you. Names were invented to find each other in crowds. They were not meant to echo out of iron and water and grass. The last time the 1019 chirped, I left the phone where it lay and walked into the bathroom and turned on the fan and let that dumb wind be my brain for a while. When I came back, the app log had a new line. 37 seconds of me breathing. The phone had been off. Now we move to the fourth story, where a face in a parking lot waits with a familiar smile that is almost right. If you want it, say the word. Story 4. The borrowed face in lot 7. SkinWalker. At the gate, the woman at the glass looked exactly like my coworker Casey, down to the flyaway ponytail and the mole by her left eye, but her reflection in the booth window blinked a half beat late while the badge reader said her name wrong. The tone did not go up like a cheerful ping. It slid down like a little elevator sigh, and the display printed CASCY with a stray space like somebody had copied and pasted a face and forgot to line it up. I know how it sounds. Watch the timing with me, and you will see why I did not unlock that gate. Lot 7 after midnight smells like damp concrete and old peppermint. The ozone tang from the gate motor lives in the back of your throat, and the motion lights hum awake for 45 seconds before they decide we do not need them. Rain ticked on the polycarbonate roof above my booth like someone drumming fingertips. The HVAC vent purred and made my badge lanyard flick at my collar. Somewhere in the lobby, the elevator dinged a bright, polite note, and then no one arrived. I had a sticky note on my monitor that said, "Casey quit gum last week. Ask about patches." The air by the glass smelled like a wrapper left in heat. I was covering back-to-back overnights to hit overtime because our landlord found a number he liked and made it our new rent. Eli made tea strong enough to stand a spoon and promised a nap on the couch so they could pick me up at dawn. Research Park was short on guards, and our supervisor had been bouncing between campuses all night. The 312 gate audit would roll through whether I loved it or not. The shuttle would nose in at 3:20, and I was the only staff checkpoint on the east side. At 2:46 exactly, the knock came. Not loud, not urgent. The kind of knock a coworker uses when they want to ask for a spare umbrella. I looked up at camera 7B. The frame hit 2 hours, 45 minutes, and 29 seconds, and stuttered for a blink like it always does when the server runs a task, then resumed with water, sliding up the glass for one instant, as if the wind had changed direction inside the lens. When I turned back to the window, Casey stood there with the night janitorial tote and the same tired smile she wore when she asked for extra gloves. Her badge photo matched her face. Her reflection lagged like a second actor hitting the line late. She lifted the badge to the reader, and the tone went down. I keep repeating this because it mattered. Policy 4.7 is boring until it keeps you from a bad mistake. Firmware family A sings up, family B sings down, and we do not have B anywhere on this site. The reader printed CASCY like a stutter and then cleared itself as if embarrassed. On camera 7B, the floodlights over the turnstiles were off, And then in the next frame, they were on with the figure already standing in light as if it arrived between beats. The vending machine in the lobby thunked like a purchase with no one visible, and I tasted peppermint I had not unpacked. "Casey," I said into the mic, and the radio crackled back, "Casey," in my cadence, even though I had not keyed the switch. The wall mirror that helps me see the alley behind the booth showed her smiling at me a half-second before her real face moved. If you have worked a night gate, you know how a tone can feel like a decision. I soft opened the pedestrian turnstile to verify her in person. A little rule bend, I tell myself, is customer service, and the descending chirp hung in the booth air like a string caught between my front teeth. She laughed at herself like she always did and put the stress on the wrong part of my name. The storm warning made the motion lights weird. They usually take a full second to wake. I stepped out of the booth and did not cross the sensor line yet. The light above her was already on, bathing her in flat gray like a portrait. Her ponytail was bone dry, and I could see raindrops hitting the plastic awning inches from her. I pinged real Casey's extension from the booth phone, and it slid to voicemail with a new recorded message I had never heard. "Hey, this is Case. Night shift is over. Leave it," the recording said, and a click went through the booth like a coin dropped on tile. I put the vehicle gate into maintenance to stop it twitching through false alarms. Maintenance mode is a little secret you use when lightning flicks the relays. It leaves the barrier open a meter so it can cycle without slamming. It felt responsible in the moment. It created a mouth at my back that I could not close without undoing everything. I took the spare guest badge off my lanyard by habit. It has a hairline crack that makes the reader hiccup sometimes, which is why I keep it as a kind of shield. I slipped out of the booth for 5 seconds that grew teeth and wanted to bite me. She was close enough that I could read the small print on her badge. The print was accurate. The little hologram shimmered as she tilted it. She smelled like peppermint that had been in a pocket for years. "You doing 2 nights in a row, Juno?" she asked, and put the emphasis wrong, giving it that song the HR rep uses when they do training. "Eli said you were killing yourself." My throat closed because I had said that exact phrase last week in our kitchen, and I had not said it on a call in the booth, and I do not talk that way to anybody at work. I stepped back until my butt hit the desk, and the radio repeated my last sentence from 2 minutes ago with my tiny throat click copied into it. The air felt charged in the old, dumb way of a sweater pulled off. Camera 7B ticked toward 3 hours, 11 minutes, and 29 seconds and froze its little freeze. In the frame after, the figure shoulder kissed the glass, and I had not seen it cross the barrier. "Badge again," I said in my nicest gate voice, and she tipped the card and made the reader sing down like a sad flute while the display printed CASCY with the space in a different place. I knew I had to choose. Call the supervisor and lock the gate and strand the 320 shuttle and explain to site ops how I fired off a false lockdown over a tone, or escort Casey through to the lobby as we sometimes do in weather and give something access inside our footprint that I could not wrestle back out. The gate audit at 312 rolls a script that loves precise timing. I decided on a third option that makes sense only if you are me. I would hold her at the glass and force a rebadge at 3 hours, 12 minutes, and 29 seconds and use the cracked guest badge to detune the reader long enough to close everything. The price was leaving the booth door ajar so I could flatten the guest badge to the glass over the reader. The meter wide mouth on my back breathed rain and gray wind. The vendor machine thunked again like an empty throat. The motion light behind the figure stayed on while I stood still, proof it had been on before I moved. "We could just talk," she said, and said Eli's name in their warm voice, and then copied the exact private sentence we had argued over on Sunday. If you have ever had your own words spoken to you from the wrong mouth, you know the way food turns to salt on your tongue. I remember the rule about the tones because the dullest rules are the ones that hurt less when they break. Firmware family B is not ours. Descending chirp is not ours. The camera's stutter at 29 is a server housekeeping job, and I had seen the water on the lens go up in that glitch like a fish leaping. The sticky on my monitor said Casey Quick Gum. The peppermint smell at the glass was old, melted sugar with dust. The ponytail did not drip and the reflection blinked late, and I still had to make a small gear turn in a precisely stupid machine and it had to be mine to turn. 3 hours, 12 minutes, and 25 seconds on the CCTV. The line of little numbers beneath 7 be fattened where the colon sat. The figure smiled in the booth mirror before her real mouth remembered to. The reader beeped down when she presented the card, and my skin tried to crawl off my body to live in the vending alcove. I pressed the cracked guest badge flat over the reader window like a bandage. The crack has a way of making the electronics forget their job for a breath. The reader light smeared, and the little antenna field fell out of true, and she had a razor palm to place her card higher than she wanted. The motion light did not wait for me to trip it. It already burned. The vending machine thumped. The radio breathed my breath and said Eli with a shape that learned my timing. "You know what went wrong with the blue mop?" I asked, like we were playing a dumb game, and she told the truth, but her eyelids blinked both together in the same stiff delay the mirror had, and her brows did not join the party. The badge display printed CASEY with the space shifted to a new place no UI would choose twice. The ponytail lay perfect in the rain. I felt the audit script swell like a wave that cannot be negotiated. 3 hours, 12 minutes, and 29 seconds froze, and a smear on the frame arrived where her hand had been. The descending tone started up again, a little lower this time, like the reader was not convinced. I angled the cracked corner of the guest badge until it bit the reader field with a tiny static pop. The tone warbled as if 2 songs got sung at once. I slapped my own lanyard over both cards mid-chirp, and the reader light burped and went yellow. The script threw up a line I have never seen in real time. Invalid composite, then a clean little scold. Audit paused. I shoved the booth door with my shoulder and collapsed the gap the maintenance mode had left. The motor made that ozone smell and hummed like a heavy thing being told to sit. Behind the glass, the reflection kept smiling for 1 extra second, and then it fought to catch up with its own face. The figure stepped back because it had to pretend to walk. The gate stuttered, then slid shut, and in the space where a person should have been, there was only rain that did not care about me. Weird firmware. I said into my mic for the benefit of any future person who would read my notes. The shuttle nosed up only 60 seconds late, driver leaning to see if I would wave. I waved. The automatic audit logged a minor delay, and the turnstiles sang polite little ascending pings as sleepy text badged through. The radio returned to saying nothing in a very loud way. I went back inside and took maintenance mode off and set the safety interlocks the way they are supposed to be. My phone sat on the counter at 6% battery and did not want to charge. The peppermint in the air went flat like a wrapper crumpled in a pocket. My hand shook while I wrote the only report that would get me to keep my job. Site ops called my choice a coachable moment and gave me one of those talks that sound like congratulations with the word but hiding inside. The supervisor asked why the maintenance mode had been active during the audit and wondered aloud about my tendency to freestyle. Eli read my sanitized notes and said we would talk later, which is love grown up enough to tell you the truth. I promised to call a supervisor first next time or to lock down fast instead of building little machines out of rules. Promises are lights you try to keep on. I kept touching the cracked corner of the guest badge like you touch a talisman you know does not belong to your faith. A week later, off shift and human again in our elevator, the chime dropped instead of rising. I felt in my teeth like the reader had leaned over my shoulder to tell me a secret. The stainless door gave me back my face with the building's fluorescent twitching on my skin, and my reflection blinked a half beat late, like it was buffering. I looked at my phone without unlocking it. The Lot 7 audit log had synced to the cloud and sat there like a small cloudy lie. It showed my badge number granting Casey at 3 hours, 12 minutes, and 29 seconds exactly, without the stray space, and the arrow beside it pointed green. I watched the elevator door long enough to feel foolish. The old peppermint in the bottom of my bag left a ghost on my fingers. The crack in the guest badge had spread into a hairline that ran to the edge. When I sat on the counter at home, it vibrated once, a tiny stiff shiver you could write off to the fridge compressor if you wanted to. Eli came in behind me and asked if I was going to remember to bring home dinner from the food trucks on Thursday. And I said yes like I meant it, which I did. Love is keeping simple promises as if they are iron. If you ever work a night gate, you will learn to hear tones the way musicians hear keys. You will learn to trust up and side-eye down. You will look at reflections for the lag, the little late blink that tells you the world is catching up to a copy. When a vending machine thunks for no one, you will count your breaths and not let the radio count them with you. If someone knocks and gets your name right, but gets your music wrong, you will let timing be your door. You will hold the line until the script stutters and you can close it. I left a note for myself on the booth monitor the next night. It said, "The motion light takes 1 second to wake, so if it is already on, you are not the first person in the scene." It said, "Family B tones do not belong here." It said, "Do not leave your back to a mouth you made." I wiped the sticky off and wrote it again because the pen had run. At 3:12, the audit sang up like a small choir and left. The shuttle rolled in at 3:20 and left. The rain made a clean sound on the roof like a zipper. The gate motor exhaled a little ozone breath. I still keep the cracked guest badge on my lanyard, hairline and all. When I pass the elevator in our building, I wait for the chime, and I do not get in until it sings in the right direction. Eli asked me once if I believe in anything anymore, or if I am just a stack of checklists with a heartbeat, and I told him yes. I believe in moving when the tone goes up. I believe in pausing when the world blinks wrong. I believe in closing a gap, even if it makes a complaint on paper later. The gap does not read paperwork. It reads you. Sometimes, just to test myself, I stand at our front door with the chain half latched, and I breathe until my breath stops sounding like someone else's recording. I hold my phone without opening any apps, and I let it be a dark square that does not reflect. The hallway light down by the stairs hums awake before I step into its cone like it knows I am coming, and I have learned not to treat that like a greeting. I treat it like a stutter I did not make. Then I go downstairs anyway, because the only way to get through a building at night is to decide that you live there. Now we move to the last one for tonight, the story about what waited beyond the treeline. If you want it, say the word. Story 5, What Waited Beyond the Treeline. The skinwalkers hunt the line of cedar posts hummed like teeth on a comb, while the woods called my childhood nickname almost right, and our boundary spoon spun on its red thread without wind. I felt the pull in my tongue first, like a word I did not want to say had hooked into the root of it. The thrush out in the dark repeated 3 notes in the exact same wrong place, starting and stopping like a loop someone had cut too short. When I cupped my hand to the spoon, it stopped for a beat, then turned south where the cedar run was unfinished, as if it could see what we had chosen to leave for morning. The air tasted like tin and cedar and cold river stone. My sleeves were wet wool that would not dry. The generator ticked thin behind the shed, a sober little heartbeat, and iron nails clicked in a mason jar each time I shifted on the porch. Juniper smoke threaded low from the coffee can brazier and braided into my breath without warming it. Dry leaves rubbed one another like paper far off, a whispering schoolroom no one had dismissed. If you have ever heard a bird repeat only the part it remembers, you know the itch it puts under your skin. But it is not a threat. It is a suggestion shaped like you. I came back for one night to help hold the line. My grandmother left the property to us with a note that said the watch kept it from becoming someone else's map. I did not believe like she did. I believed in fences and fuel and paperwork. And still I was here to finish the south run of posts, to stand from 1 in the morning to 4, and to make sure no one could claim we had broken a habit. The cousins told me winter watches were always thin, and if we got through this one, the sale would hold until spring. Sometimes you guard what you might have to give up. I pretend I am above it, and then I overdo it. That is my flaw. I measure twine like I am laying pipe. I weigh salt like I am baking bread. Theo, 17 and hungry to be taken seriously, claimed the watch beside mine and hugged the bell rope like it would promote him. The road drifted in behind a fallen pine, and the truck sat snowed in with a blanket over its nose. Our nearest neighbor was in Arizona with a grandbaby and would not call. The bell rope was swollen and slick with ice where it ran through the tower pulley. I could not ring it without feeling like I was throttling a friend. At 1:12 we heard it. The thrush did its 3 notes like a coin roll and stopped on the same bad seam. A deer stood outside the post with its mouth open, teeth bare, but no breath showed even when the generator hiccuped a gust across its muzzle. Footprints had appeared under a low birch branch, not leading in, just beginning, as if something had been lowered by careful hands. The compass on my lanyard pulled toward the treeline instead of north. The spoon on its red thread spun and faced south, toward the seam of unstapled thorn twine, where we had told ourselves we would finish at dawn. Have you ever felt a boundary look back at you? We keep a ledger on the south post, a roll call made with charcoal over winter after winter. Grandma called it the square. In the beam of my headlamp, I saw the frayed thorn twine at the south post was twisted wrong, like a left-handed knot tied by a right hand. When we cut cedar earlier, the sap had bled cold like breath, not warm like blood, and that cold sweetness kept drifting back around my teeth as if it wanted to be remembered. The spoon string lifted and fell with the tiny currents the generator made, but each time it settled, the bowl faced exactly where the line was weak. The compass drifted and touched the plastic at my sternum. The ledger waited like a quiet test. I told Theo I would retie and be right back. If you have ever managed a family ritual you do not trust, you know the exact tone I used. I stepped outside the porch light with the twine in my pocket, salt in my palm, iron nails tucked under my tongue like a dare. When I knelt, my knee knocked one nail from the notch in the post, and it rolled to the dirt with a sound that felt heavier than it ought to. I retwisted the twine neat and city tight, and the thrush stuttered closer like a tape cueing to the next segment. The deer's ears turned toward me, but its eyes watched the house like it was waiting for someone to come out. Theo's walkie hissed on my belt and repeated my last sentence back to me a half second late, as if I had keyed the button while thinking and the thought recorded. I froze with a knot still pinched in my teeth. The porch bulb hummed and then went low the way a person sighs into sleep. The jar of nails clicked once like a clock strike. I looked up at the bell tower and saw the rope licking the lip of the pulley and slipping each time the wind moved. We were not going to get a clean sound out of it, not unless someone went up to the platform and married weight to it. Theo watched me through the porch screen and lifted his chin like an offer. We walked the line to the creek split with our lamps low and our breath too loud. Trail Cam 3 at the bend blinked from its cheap infrared and threw a pale wash over the post like moon pretending to be electronics. It snapped a burst and showed us both in a red smear on the little screen, but in the next frame, a second Nora silhouette stood behind me, shoulder to shoulder with my shrug. A bead of cedar sap glowed cold on the lens like a star that had wandered into the wrong story. The generator dipped and made the air get thinner, and I killed the porch string to listen, surrendering the floodlight on the tower and the small eye of safety that light tells. In the dark, our charms mattered more, because there was nothing else to look at. The spoon turned on its thread and came to rest pointing at the ledger, not the knot I had just fixed. The deck seams creaked under our boots. Theo took the spoon lightly by the handle and let it swing, and it slowed, not like physics, but like a car easing into a parking spot. The drawer in the hallway slid an inch as the house settled, and the noise made both of us flinch like we had been caught looking under a bed. I told him a dumb story about the time Grandma used to hide the spoon to make us test ourselves. He laughed in the wrong place, and I realized I had told that story to myself. Boot prints appeared under the fence in a neat line like Mason's tread. Mason the poacher who liked to drink and brag and once left a snare on our side of the creek. Theo's jaw went stubborn, and he said the tower bell would bring the cousins if the radio could not. He bounced the rope in both hands, and the fibers squealed but did not catch. He took a little cowbell from the hook, a joke tool Grandma kept for her when she did not want to wake the whole ridge, and shook it, and it made a desk toys noise in the ice. I went back to the south post to make the ledger right, because duty is a flaw you dress as virtue. I signed the roll call corner, Nora R. in my square, careful letters to mark the rotation complete for the audit no one but us believed in. The charcoal left a greasy black that felt like the bottom of a pan. The compass on my chest swung and held, not north but square at my ribs, as if I were a landmark on a map I had not agreed to draw. The thrush did its 3 notes again, and this time it did not glitch. It nailed the lullaby pause. I learned to sleep, Grandma's tired 3rd note, and the sound fit the air like it had waited inside it all along. If you have ever heard a lullaby sung by someone who never knew you, you know how your skin can forget it fits. Plow wouldn't come till morning, even if the roads had been roads. My phone read emergency calls only like a manners lesson. The bell rope slipped in the pulley and stripped bark where it kissed. Generator fuel hugged the bottom of the glass and would make it an hour if we behaved, and less if we did not. Trail cam died with a blink and left us with our headlamps. Snow began again, erasing our prints as if we had never walked anywhere. The family group text sat unsent, like a prayer with a wrong address. When habit dismantles itself, you have to build a different habit out of whatever you can lift. I am embarrassed to say I turned pages in the ledger like it might give me a braver answer. Grandma's rule was written in her hand in the front. Never write a name on the last post. 3 corners of old winters had signatures, looped and smudged and brave. The 4th corner had been blank until my wet glove dragged a fresh charcoal letter across it. I saw how the hunt worked then in a mean, tidy way. The treeline was a pacing harness. The thing walked the perimeter to learn our footsteps and our breaths. And when a human granted 4 names to the corners, the square was not a wall but a door. The deer's jaw closed like a hinge. Mason could have done boot molds. He could have used a predator whistle. He could have stood by the creek and laughed into the trees. On the far bank, 6-toed prints stepped across the skim ice and left it uncracked, and the boot prints reversed direction without scuffing their edges. The whistle from the line nailed Grandma's lullaby pause exactly as if it had watched her lower her head to the work of singing and steal the flaw from her mouth. I wanted it to be Mason so badly my throat hurt like a muscle held too long. But we had given the square the 4th corner, and the square wanted to be filled. Theo made a choice for me. He said he would sprint to the tower and shake the cowbell until the cousins answered or the ridge did. He turned, and the tower was further than it had been. The spoon inside the house spun fast enough to flatten and pointed south. I had to make a worse choice. Stay inside the porch ring and let Theo test the way for me, or break the boundary rule and cross to drag him back. If you were yelling at me to hold the line, I respect you. I grabbed the jar of iron nails and a twist of burning juniper, and I crossed at the south post. Cold, without wind, flooded through the breach and found the joints in my fingers like it had been looking for them. The compass on my chest warmed, then pointed at me like I was a letter in an alphabet it liked. On my tongue, the iron tasted like pennies and teeth. The deer collapsed with a silent motion like a ladder folding and lay with its legs in a dumb tangle. Theo stood at the tower base with the cowbell in his fist, white-eyed, his breath the only honest thing in the world. The voices split the way weather splits. One in the treeline perfected the thrush's 3 notes. One from the creek repeated my last sentence with my swallow. A third used Grandma's lullaby with her tired pause, as if her voice had never retired. At the south post, the ledger stared with my name completing its square and made me look at my own hand like it belonged to someone else. The iron nail I had knocked free left a clean mouth in the cedar. Through that hole, a pale hand shape of cold pressed into the air without touching anything, the way frost presses to glass and makes a fern out of breath. It made a shape like a palm, searching for mine. The juniper flame in my fingers guttered and coughed smoke like a sick person trying to clear their throat. If you have ever felt the world offer you your own hand back, you know how wrong it can look. The rule that saved me was petty. Don't finish something you don't mean. I took the nail and used its head like a scraper to dig my name off the cedar. The charcoal clung and then smeared, and I wiped it with river clay from the bank and pushed the gray paste into the corner like I was thumbprinting a document. I pressed the red thread spoon flat across the ledger, bowl to wood, handle toward me, and whispered the old unname I do not believe in. The thorn line I had tied neat, I twisted the country way Grandma did, messy and mean and back on itself, a knot you can't diagram. I set the iron nail back in its mouth and hit it with a smooth round stone. The sound the hammering made was small and made the hair on my arms lie down. The juniper flame coughed out and left only a thread of smoke. The thrush call faltered like a song a child forgot. The compass jumped toward true and then snapped north with a decisive little twitch the way a dog decides to come inside. The spoon inside the house spun once and then stopped like a penny falling flat. The cold hand pulled back through nothing and left nothing. A breath I had not noticed I was holding left me, messy and loud. Theo stumbled into me and mashed my ear with the cowbell and said my name like an apology he could live with. We stood there until the generator found its last good note and died, and the ridge took a color that is not quite day and not quite mercy. The deer stood, not quite right, and limped out of the frame we had drawn. The tower bell said nothing because we had not earned it. We made coffee on the camp stove like two people camping in a place other people live. We did not say Grandma's name in case it could be used, and we did not tell the cousins anything we could not bear to hear back. The South Post wore a gray smear where I had erased myself. The ledger looked lighter for my absence, which is a trap if you want it to be. Theo's hand kept opening and closing like it needed to hide the bell and could not find a pocket. His knuckles were red where the metal had bit. He said he would not say the thrush words again, even if he could sing. I said we would buy more nails. He said he would ask the plow guy to do one more pass for Grandma's sake, and then laughed at how dumb that sounded. We stood on the porch and listened to quiet that was not pretending anymore, and the spoon hung at peace and made me want to apologize to kitchen tools. If you think I am exaggerating, you have never been awake when a rule has decided to forgive you. A week later, home in the city where the map pretends it is in charge, my apartment smelled faintly of cold cedar sap. Not pine, not cleaner, cedar, the wet, sweet, cold kind that makes your teeth feel like they have pockets. My compass sat in a dish by the door where I dropped my keys, and when I lifted it, the needle swung and pointed at the bathroom vent, not north, as if the rest of the world had been rearranged while I slept. The spoon on the key hook spun once without a breeze and stopped facing south, where the building's alley runs like a thin, dark river. I stood there and listened to my own breath and tried not to force it into a shape I thought would be safer. I touched the iron nail I had carried home in my pocket without thinking, and it was warmer than the room. If you have ever brought a habit into a new place, you know how it insists on living there. I have not written my name on any corner of any new map. I rub a little river clay between my fingers when I do laundry, and it smells like cold and cedar more than it should. When the vent sighs, the compass ticks toward it like it is listening, and I let it because sometimes not finishing the square is the only keep we have. Now, that closes the fifth story. If you want an epilogue or if any voice learned your breath tonight, remember to breathe anyway. Thank you for wandering the dark with me on Whispering Abyss. We walked past a porch light that would not hum right, around a house a circle would not melt. We stood at mile marker 19 while a scanner borrowed a heartbeat. We faced a smile that blinked late, and we held a cedar line while a spoon spun for an answer none of us wanted. You stayed. That matters, even when the night tries to decide your name for you. Tell me what clung to you after the lights came back. The wrong pause in a lullaby, the six-toed step that never sank, the trooper hat turned the wrong way, the elevator chime falling instead of rising, or the compass pointing at your chest instead of north. Which story threaded itself through your house when you got up for water? Leave your theory below, and your favorite clue I planted that you think I did not see, because I promise you I did. If you felt a little braver with the sound up, tap like so the next traveler can find this road. Subscribe if you want more true-sounding lies told like secrets after midnight. Share it with the friend who always says they do not scare, and then watch them glance at their phone when the hallway goes quiet. If you have a theme you want me to hunt, say it clearly and do not whisper. The things outside already whisper enough for all of us. Next time, we might follow doors that change places while you sleep, or a building that keeps a second set of stairs only on rainy nights. Maybe we spend a shift underground where the intercom knows old versions of your name. Maybe we look into mirrors that update a heartbeat late. Whatever we choose, it will be told, before you go, do one small thing for me. Check your phone's voice notes. If there is a 6-second clip you do not remember recording, do not press play. Not yet. Set it down. Listen to the room first. If the keys on your hook click once in a windless kitchen, delete the note and count to 3 before the second click arrives. If nothing clicks, congratulate your house for being only a house, and sleep while the night is busy elsewhere. I will be here when the lights go low again. Good night, and keep your names to yourselves.